watched him kill a man in cold blood. And instead of screaming, instead of running, she made a deal with the murderer. 1 year of silence in exchange for the freedom she'd dreamed of since childhood. But freedom has a price, and some secrets are too heavy to carry alone. He was called the Honorable by everyone who knew him. A warrior respected, a brother trusted, a man who'd never broken an oath, until the night he drove a blade between his cousin's ribs to protect a love that could never be spoken. Now the only witness to his crime is a slave girl who sees too much, understands too deeply, and is beginning to make him feel something he has no right to feel. 11 months of living with murder. 11 months of shared guilt and growing connection. And just when freedom is 2 days away, just when escape seems possible, a letter from a dead man arrives. Now she must stand before the assembly and choose, tell the truth and lose everything, or stay silent and watch the man she never meant to care about die for a crime she helped him hide. The wooden spoon slipped from Ira's fingers, clattering against the stone floor of the longhouse kitchen. She didn't bend to retrieve it. Couldn't. Her legs had forgotten how to move, how to obey the simple commands her mind screamed at them. Through the narrow gap in the storage room door, she watched Steinar the Honorable drive his sayax blade between his cousin's ribs with the precision of a man who had killed many times before. But this wasn't battle. This was murder. The cousin, Dagmar, made a sound like air escaping a punctured waterskin. Wet. Final. His eyes went wide, then empty, and Steinar lowered him to the ground with something that looked almost like tenderness. The kind of care you'd show a sleeping child. Era's heart hammered so violently she was certain it would give her away. The storage room suddenly felt smaller than a coffin, the smell of dried fish and old barley suffocating. Sweat traced cold lines down her spine despite the autumn chill that seeped through the longhouse walls. She pressed herself against the rough wood, splinters catching in the coarse fabric of her thrall's dress. Don't breathe, don't move, don't exist. Steinar straightened, wiping the blade on Dagmar's tunic with methodical strokes. His face, usually so composed during feasts and things, looked carved from grief. His jaw worked silently, and for one terrible moment, Era thought he might weep. Instead, he dragged the body toward the side door that led to the animal pens, leaving a dark smear across the packed earth floor. That's when his eyes found hers. The world stopped. Every sound in the longhouse, the distant voices preparing for tomorrow's wedding feast, the crackling fire in the main hall, the wind battering the turf roof, all of it dissolved into ringing silence. Steinar froze mid-step, Dagmar's ankles still gripped in his blood-stained hands. They stared at each other across the dim space, 3 paces apart, a chasm wider than the sea separating their worlds. He, the Jarl's most trusted warrior, bearer of oath rings, the man whose word could condemn or save. She, a thrall who had scrubbed his floors for 14 years, invisible as smoke, voiceless as stone. Era's throat closed. Her mind raced through every story she'd heard whispered among the other thralls. The girl who saw a freeman steal and was found drowned in the fjord. The old man who witnessed a merchant's wife with her lover. Discovered hanging from a beam, ruled a suicide. Witnesses were liabilities. Thrall witnesses didn't survive. Steinar released Dagmar's legs. The body slumped with a sound that would haunt Era's sleep for months to come. He took one step toward her, then another. His hand still gripped the sayax, blade dark and gleaming. This is how I die. In a storage room that smells like herring and mold. 26 years old, and I die knowing nothing but servitude. But Steinar didn't raise the blade. Instead, he sheathed it with a sharp metallic whisper. When he spoke, his voice was rough, scraped raw. You saw. It wasn't a question. Era managed the smallest nod, though her neck felt rigid as iron. Her fingers found the door frame, gripping it to keep from collapsing. Do you know what I've done? His words came slowly, each one carefully chosen, as if he were negotiating a trade agreement rather than deciding whether she would see another dawn. She forced her voice to work, though it emerged barely above a whisper. You killed your cousin, my lord. I killed a man who would have destroyed 3 innocent lives. Steinar's eyes, gray as winter seas, held hers with an intensity that made her want to look away. But thralls didn't look away from freemen, and thralls certainly didn't look away from men deciding their fate. Dagmar discovered that my nephew, my brother's son, carries my blood. He was going to announce it at the wedding feast tomorrow, for silver, for the entertainment of watching a family tear itself apart. The words settled over Ira like ash from a funeral pyre. She understood immediately. The Jarl's wife, Thora, a woman known for her quiet sadness, for the way she flinched when her husband raised his voice. The baby boy, barely 2 years old, with Steinar's distinctive gray eyes. The child would be cast out, Steinar continued, his voice dropping even lower. Thora would be divorced, shamed, possibly executed for adultery. My brother would lose his honor. The Jarl would demand my head for the betrayal. He paused, and something flickered across his face. Pain, perhaps, or resignation. So I chose. 1 guilty life for 3 innocent ones. Ira's mind struggled to process. In the sagas, the skalds sang, heroes killed monsters and enemies. They didn't murder family members in dark corners, no matter how justified. And she was being told this why? To make her understand before he silenced her permanently, as if reading her thoughts. Steinar took another step closer, close enough now that she could see the muscle jumping in his jaw, the fine tremor in his hands that he couldn't quite control. I could kill you, he said, and the terrible thing was how factual he sounded, not threatening, simply stating truth. 1 more body, 1 more secret. Who questions when a thrall disappears? Her breath caught. The spoon she'd dropped earlier lay between them, a ridiculous domestic object in a moment that would determine whether she lived or died. But I won't. The words came out like a confession torn from his chest. I've taken 1 life tonight. I won't compound evil with more evil. Era blinked. Of all the possibilities she'd imagined in the last moments, mercy hadn't been among them. Instead, I offer you a bargain. Steinar's hand moved to the leather purse at his belt. He pulled out a small iron key, holding it up so she could see. 1 year. Serve me directly, in my household. Keep my secret. At the end of that year, I will buy your freedom from the Jarl and give you this key to your collar. You'll walk away a free woman, with enough silver to start a new life wherever you choose. The key caught the dim light filtering through the smoke hole above. Freedom. The word was so foreign, Era almost couldn't attach meaning to it. She'd been a thrall since she was 12 years old, sold to pay her father's gambling debts to a traveling merchant. She barely remembered what it felt like to make choices, to own her own time, to speak without permission. And if I refuse? The question escaped before she could stop it. Something that might have been respect flickered in Steinar's eyes. Then you refuse. I won't force you. But know this. If you tell anyone what you saw tonight, I will confess everything. The murder, the reason, all of it. And the law will demand my death. But before I die, 3 innocents will be destroyed. A child will grow up knowing he's the son of incest and murder. A woman will lose everything. My brother will be shamed beyond recovery. He paused. That blood would be on your hands as much as mine. It was a trap more elegant than any physical cage. He was giving her freedom while making her complicit in his crime. If she stayed silent, she became an accomplice. If she spoke, she became the destroyer of innocence. 1 year, he repeated. Then freedom. Or tell the Jarl now, and watch everything burn. Era looked at the key in his hand, then at his face. Steinar, the honorable who had just committed the most dishonorable act imaginable, was offering her the one thing she'd dreamed of for 14 years. All it would cost was her soul. 3 months had passed since Era spoke the word that changed everything. Yes, such a small sound to carry such enormous weight. She'd watched Steinar's shoulders drop with relief so profound it looked like pain, and in that moment she'd understood something terrible. He had been prepared for her to refuse, prepared to face execution rather than kill again. That knowledge sat in her chest like a stone she couldn't cough up. Now she stood in Steinar's private hall, a structure separate from the main longhouse where he'd lived alone since his wife died in childbirth 4 years ago. The space was austere, almost monk-like in its simplicity. No tapestries softened the walls. No carved posts boasted of victories. Just functional furniture, weapons maintained to perfection, and books. So many books. Era had never seen a warrior who read. "The porridge is burning." She startled, nearly dropping the iron pot. Steinar stood in the doorway, his hair damp from the morning wash at the stream. He didn't look at her with the casual dismissal most freemen showed thralls. Instead, his gaze held something uncomfortable. Awareness. As if he actually saw her as a person rather than a function. It unnerved her more than cruelty would have. "Forgive me, my lord." She pulled the pot from the fire, stirring frantically. The bottom layer had scorched black, filling the hall with acrid smoke. "You were thinking about something else." Again, not an accusation, an observation. He moved to the table, sitting with the careful slowness of a man whose body carried old injuries. "You do that often. Go somewhere inside your head where I can't follow." Era's hands stilled. In 3 months of service, Steinar had never been cruel, never raised his voice, never touched her except to hand her something or move past her in the narrow space. He treated her with a courtesy that felt like mockery of everything she understood about her place in the world, and it was destroying her. "I was thinking about the wedding feast," she said, surprising herself with honesty. How Dagmar's body was found in the ravine 3 days later. How everyone believed he'd gotten drunk and fallen. Steinar's jaw tightened. Convenient ravine. Convenient lie. The words escaped before she could stop them. She waited for anger, for punishment. Instead, Steinar simply nodded. Yes, convenient lie. He accepted the bowl of partially burned porridge she offered without complaint. "Do you regret it, saying yes?" The question hit her like a fist. Era sank onto the stool across from him, propriety forgotten. Thralls didn't sit in the presence of freemen. Thralls didn't have conversations. But nothing about this arrangement followed normal rules. "Every day," she whispered. "I regret it every single day." Something flickered across Steinar's face. Not anger. Something worse. Understanding. "Good," he said quietly. "If you didn't regret it, you'd be as corrupted as I am." They ate in silence, the burned porridge tasting like ash and complicity. Outside, the settlement was waking. Voices drifted through the walls. A child laughing. Someone calling for help with a stuck cart. Normal life, continuing as if the world hadn't tilted on its axis. "Tell me something," Steinar said finally, pushing his half-eaten bowl away. "In all these years as a thrall, did anyone ever ask your name?" Era blinked. "You know my name, my lord. I know the name the Jarl's steward recorded when you were sold." Era. "Mercy." His eyes met hers. "But is that truly your name? Or the name your father gave you hoping the gods would show him mercy for his debts?" The question punched through 14 years of carefully constructed numbness. No one had ever asked. No one had ever cared. She was Era the thrall. Era who scrubbed floors and emptied chamber pots and existed only as a function. "Solveig," she heard herself say. "My mother named me Solveig before she died. My father called me Era after. Said my birth name died with her." Steinar absorbed this in silence. Then, deliberately, he stood and gave her a small bow. The kind a freeman might give another freeman. The kind that acknowledged equal humanity. "Then I will call you Solveig, if you permit it. At least here, in this space between us." Tears burned behind Era's eyes. She blinked them back furiously. Crying was dangerous. Feeling was dangerous. This entire situation was a trap lined with kindness, and she was walking deeper into it with every passing day. "Why?" The word came out broken. "Why do you care about my real name? Why do you treat me like I matter? It would be easier if you were cruel. Easier if I could hate you." Steinar returned to his seat, and for a long moment he simply looked at her. Really looked, as if trying to memorize her face for some future moment when memory would be all that remained. Because guilt is a living thing, he said finally. It eats at you from the inside. Every kindness I show you is an attempt to prove to myself that I'm not the monster who could kill his own cousin in cold blood. Every conversation we have is me trying to convince myself that I can still recognize another person's humanity when I've demonstrated I can discard it when convenient. His honesty was more brutal than any blow. You're using me, Ira said, slowly, understanding crystallizing. To absolve yourself. Yes. No hesitation, no pretty lies. I'm using you, Solveig, just as I'm being used by my own conscience. We're both prisoners of that moment in the storage room. The difference is, your prison has an end date. Mine is eternal. Ira stood abruptly, needing distance from his self-flagellation. She moved to the small window, looking out at the settlement spread below. From here, she could see the Jarl's main hall where she'd served for 14 years, could see the other thralls moving between buildings like ghosts in worn clothing. What was he like? She asked without turning. Dagmar, before you killed him. She felt, rather than saw, Steinar's flinch. Charming, quick-witted, the kind of man who could make a room laugh with a single observation. His voice had gone flat, reciting facts. He was also cruel in small ways, enjoyed watching others squirm, found entertainment in revealing secrets and watching relationships fracture. He once told me that power wasn't about strength or silver. It was about knowing which words would hurt most and having the courage to speak them. And you think the child, your nephew, would have been better off with that man alive? I think, Steinar said carefully, that I'll never know. Because I made a choice that no one should have to make, and now I live with it, just as you do. Ira turned back to face him, in the morning light streaming through the window. Steinar looked older than his 32 years. There were lines around his eyes that hadn't been there 3 months ago. Or perhaps she simply hadn't noticed them before, when he was just another freeman and she was just another thrall. 9 months left, she said. 9 months until you give me that key and I walk away from all of this. 9 months, he agreed. Do you know where you'll go? Far. The answer came immediately. Somewhere no one knows the name Era or Solveig. Somewhere I can pretend I'm someone who never had to choose between freedom and complicity. Steinar nodded slowly. When you find that place, Solveig, write to me. Tell me if it's possible to leave the past behind, because if you manage it, perhaps there's hope for all of us. The vulnerability in his voice was unbearable. Era realized with creeping horror that she was beginning to understand him, beginning to see him not as captor or conspirator, but as a man carrying impossible weight with no one to help bear it. She was supposed to hate him. Hatred was safe. Hatred was clean. This growing comprehension, this unwanted empathy, was neither. The truth found Ira on a gray morning in the 6th month, hidden in a place she had no business being. Steinar had left before dawn for a 3-day hunting expedition with the Jarl's men. He'd given her unusual instructions: organize his personal storage chest, the one kept locked in the corner of his sleeping alcove. The key he'd pressed into her palm had been warm from his body heat, and his eyes had held a strange intensity. You'll find things that will make you question everything, he'd said, but you deserve to know the truth of what you're protecting. Now, kneeling before the open chest, Era understood why her hands were shaking. Letters, dozens of them, written in a feminine hand on precious vellum. She recognized the writing immediately because she'd seen it on the household accounts. Thora, the Jarl's wife, had written these, and they were all addressed to Steinar. Era knew she should close the chest, relock it, pretend she'd found nothing but old weapons and winter furs. Instead, her fingers moved of their own accord, unfolding the first letter. My dearest heart, I can no longer bear the weight of this pretense. When my husband touches me, I close my eyes and imagine your hands. Is this what we've become? Thieves stealing moments that belong to others? My confessor says I should pray for strength to resist temptation. But Steinar, you are not my temptation. You are my breath, my light, my only true joy in this gray existence. The words blurred. Era blinked hard, forcing herself to continue reading. Letter after letter, spanning years. A love story written in secret ink and desperate longing. Thora describing her arranged marriage to the Jarl at 15. A political alliance between clans. Steinar's responses, careful and measured, trying to maintain honor even as his heart betrayed him. Then the tone shifted. A letter dated 3 years ago. I am with child. I know you will say it cannot be yours, that we have been so careful, that the timing makes it impossible. But Steinar, I know my own body. I know the difference between my husband's seed and yours. This child is ours, conceived that night during the harvest feast, when we were both weak and foolish and completely, utterly in love. Era's stomach turned. She forced herself to keep reading, to understand the full scope of what she was. Protecting. More letters. Thora's panic when the baby was born with Steinar's distinctive gray eyes. The Jarl's joy, oblivious. Steinar's anguish, watching his son raised by another man, unable to claim him. And then, the final letters, written just weeks before Dagmar's death. Your cousin knows. I don't know how he discovered it, but Dagmar came to me yesterday. He was smiling, Steinar. Smiling as he described exactly how he would reveal everything at Sigrid's wedding feast. He wants silver. Of course, 50 marks to stay silent. But even if we pay, he'll come back. Men like Dagmar always come back. I am so tired, my love. So tired of being afraid. The last letter was dated 2 days before the murder. Steinar, please, do not do whatever you are planning. I can see it in your eyes when you look at our son. That terrible resolve. Promise me you will not sacrifice yourself for us. We can run, take the child and disappear into the wilderness. I would rather live in a dirt hovel with you than continue this lie surrounded by silver and silk. Please, my heart, there must be another way. But there hadn't been another way. Or Steinar hadn't seen one. And so he'd made the choice that damned them all. Era sat back on her heels. The letters scattered around her like fallen leaves. Her breath came in short, sharp gasps. This wasn't the story she'd constructed in her mind. She'd imagined a single moment of weakness, a brief affair that resulted in an unwanted complication. Not this. Not a love so consuming it had burned for years, so desperate it had driven a good man to murder. The door creaked open. Ira's head snapped up, heart hammering. But it wasn't Steinar returned early. It was Thora herself, wrapped in a plain cloak, her face pale and drawn. They stared at each other across the small room. The Jarl's wife and the thrall. The woman whose secrets Ira protected, and the woman who held those secrets in her hands, literally scattered across the floor. He told you to look, Thora said quietly. It wasn't a question. She moved into the room, closing the door behind her with careful precision. Steinar said he was going to tell you everything. I argued against it, but he insisted you had the right to know what burden you carried. Era's voice came out hoarse. Why? Why would he want me to know this? Thora sank onto the bench near the door, pulling her cloak tighter despite the warmth of the room. Up close, Era could see the fine lines around her eyes. The silver threading through her dark hair. She was perhaps 30, but looked older, worn down by years of living a lie. Because, Thora said, Steinar believes that if you truly understand what you're protecting, you can make a real choice. Not a choice based on fear or ignorance, but one rooted in full knowledge. She paused, her hands twisting in her lap. He thinks you deserve that dignity, even if it destroys him. He killed for you, Era whispered. For your son, for your love. He killed because he's a good man trapped in an impossible situation. Thora's eyes glistened with unshed tears. Do you know what that does to a person? To be honorable and forced into dishonor? To protect innocence by becoming guilty? She leaned forward. Dagmar was my husband's cousin. Family. And Steinar cut him down like a rabid dog because it was the only way to save a child who doesn't even know his real father. Era gathered the letters with trembling hands, trying to restore order to chaos. The Jarl. Does he suspect? My husband is a good man, but not a perceptive one. He sees what he wishes to see: a loyal wife, a beloved brother, a healthy son who will carry on his line. Thora's voice went bitter. He's built his happiness on foundations of sand, and every day I watch him smile, knowing that one word could bring it all crashing down. Why are you telling me this? Era demanded. Why risk coming here? Because you're the only person in this entire settlement who knows the full truth. The only one who could destroy us with a single testimony at the thing. Thora stood, moving closer. Close enough that Era could smell the lavender oil she wore, the scent of wealth and comfort. And I needed to look you in the eyes and ask, can you live with this? Because Steiner can barely live with it, and he's the one who made the choice. You're just the witness forced to become accomplice. The question hung in the air like smoke. Could she live with it? Era had spent 6 months asking herself that very thing. 6 months watching Steinar move through the settlement like a ghost of his former self. 6 months carrying the weight of knowledge that pressed heavier with each passing day. I don't know, Era said finally. Some days I think I can bear it. Other days, the weight makes it hard to breathe. Then we're the same, you and I. Thora's smile was sad and understanding. Both of us prisoners of a love we didn't choose and a crime we didn't commit. Both of us. Counting days until some imagined freedom that may never truly come. She moved toward the door, then paused, looking back. 6 months left until Steinar gives you that key. 6 months until you can walk away from all of this and try to build a life untainted by our sins. Her voice dropped to barely a whisper. If you find peace, Era, if you manage to outrun this guilt, know that I envy you more than you could possibly understand. Then she was gone, leaving only the faint scent of lavender and the crushing weight of shared burden. Era looked down at the letters in her hands. Love letters that had led to murder. Words of passion that had resulted in death. She should burn them. Destroy the evidence that bound them all together in complicity. Instead, she carefully folded each one, placed them back in the chest, and locked it. Because destroying evidence wouldn't erase the truth. It would only make it easier to pretend it had never existed. And Ira was learning slowly and, painfully that pretending was its own kind of death. The realization came to Ira like frost creeping across a window. Slow, inevitable, terrifying. She was beginning to care about him. Not Steinar the murderer, not Steinar the nobleman, but Steinar the man who woke screaming 3 nights out of 7, whose hands shook when he thought no one was watching, who read poetry in the pre-dawn hours when sleep wouldn't come. 8 months had passed since that night in the storage room. 4 months remained until her freedom. And somewhere in the space between those 2 points, something fundamental had shifted. It happened in small moments. The way he'd taught her to read better, spending patient hours helping her decipher the sagas he loved. The morning she'd found him weeping silently over a wooden toy horse, and he'd confessed it was meant to be a gift for his son, the boy he could never claim. The evening he'd asked her opinion on a land dispute, then actually listened, implemented her suggestion at the thing. He treated her like a person, like someone whose thoughts mattered. And God's help her, she was starting to forget why that was dangerous. Today, that forgetting would cost her. They sat across from each other at the small table, the remains of the evening meal between them. Outside, autumn rain hammered the turf roof with relentless fury. The sound should have been comforting. Instead, it felt like the sky itself was weeping. "You're staring," Steinar said without looking up from the letter he was writing. A small smile played at his lips, the kind of expression she'd seen more frequently in recent weeks. "Have I grown a second head?" "I was thinking," Era said carefully, "about how different you are from the man I thought you were 8 months ago." Now he did look up. The firelight caught the gray of his eyes, making them almost silver. Different how? More human. The words came before she could stop them. "Back then, you were Steiner." The Honorable, a title, a reputation. A man who existed on a different plane than people like me. She paused, her throat tight. Now you're just Steinar, a person who makes mistakes and carries grief and reads poetry when he can't sleep. Something flickered across his face. Pleasure, maybe, or pain. With Steiner, the two seemed permanently intertwined. And is that a good thing? He asked quietly. That I've become more human to you? Ira opened her mouth to respond, but the words tangled in her throat. Because the honest answer was no. It wasn't good. It was catastrophic. It meant she could no longer maintain the emotional distance necessary to survive this arrangement. It meant she was beginning to see him the way Thora saw him, as someone worth loving despite everything. The silence stretched between them like a physical thing. Steinar set down his quill, giving her his full attention. That was another thing that had changed. He no longer treated conversations as interruptions to more important work. He treated them as the work itself. You're afraid, he observed. Not a question. A fact delivered with the same gentleness he used for everything now. What are you afraid of, Solveig? The use of her real name, the one only he spoke, nearly undid her. I'm afraid, she said slowly, each word pulled from somewhere deep and wounded, that I'm starting to understand why Thora loved you enough to betray her marriage vows. Why she loved you enough to risk everything. And that understanding is going to destroy me. The confession hung in the air between them. Steinar's face went very still, very pale. He looked like a man who'd just been struck but hadn't yet registered the pain. Solveig. Her name came out broken. You can't. You mustn't. I know. She laughed, but it came out wet and desperate. Do you think I want this? Do you think I woke up one morning and decided to develop feelings for the man who holds my freedom hostage? Who made me complicit in murder? Who represents everything wrong with the world I've been trapped in since I was 12 years old? Then why? The question emerged raw, stripped of all pretense. Why, Solveig? Because you see me. The tears came now, hot and furious. She didn't bother wiping them away. In 14 years as a thrall, no one has seen me the way you do. No one has asked my thoughts, respected my opinions, cared whether I was Ira or Solveig or anyone at all. You've given me something more valuable than freedom. You've given me back my humanity, and I hate you for it. Steinar stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. He crossed to the window, pressing his palms against the frame as if needing something solid to anchor him. His shoulders rose and fell with each breath, the muscles tense beneath his tunic. This is my fault, he said to the rain-streaked darkness. I thought treating you with dignity was the right thing to do. A way to prove I wasn't completely corrupted by what I'd done. But I've just created a different kind of prison, haven't I? One lined with kindness instead of cruelty, but a prison nonetheless. Yes. Era stood as well, moving closer but not touching. Never touching. That boundary remained sacred, the one line neither of them had crossed. And the worst part is, I don't even want to escape anymore. Not really. 4 months from now, you'll give me that key and I'll walk away, and I'll spend the rest of my life missing this. Missing you. Missing the man I'm supposed to hate. He turned then, and the anguish in his face was almost unbearable. I can't give you what you're beginning to want. I'm bound to Thora in ways that transcend honor or law. I killed for her. I would kill again if necessary. My heart belongs to her and to the son I can never claim. I know. Era's voice steadied, even as her world crumbled. I'm not asking for your heart, Steinar. I'm just telling you that mine has made a choice I never wanted it to make. And now I have to. Figure out how to live with that for the next 4 months, and then somehow learn to live without you for the rest of my life. The silence that followed was different from before, heavier, laced with all the things that could never be said, could never be acted upon. They stood on opposite sides of the small room, separated by duties and loyalties and impossible circumstances. I wish, Steinar said finally, his voice barely above a whisper, that I had met you before Thora, before the murder. before I became the kind of man who destroys everything he touches. Because if I had met you in another life, Solveig, I think I could have loved you the way you deserve to be loved, freely, honestly, without all this darkness between us. The words should have brought comfort. Instead, they felt like another wound. Because wishes changed nothing. The world they inhabited had no space for what-ifs and might-have-beens. But this is the life we have, Era said, finishing the thought. He couldn't speak. And in this life you belong to someone else, and I'm counting days until I can escape the mess we've both made of everything. 4 months, Steinar confirmed, his eyes holding hers across the distance. Can you bear it? 4 more months of this torture? Era considered lying. Considered saying yes, of course, it would be fine. Instead, she gave him the same brutal honesty he'd always given her. I don't know, but I'll try. Because the alternative is running now, and if I do, I'll spend forever wondering what might have happened if I'd stayed. At least this way, when I leave, I'll know I saw it through to the end. Even if the end breaks you? Even then. Steinar nodded slowly, understanding passing between them without further words. They'd crossed some invisible threshold tonight, acknowledged feelings that could never be acted upon, named desires that would never be fulfilled. And somehow they would have to find a way to exist in the same small space for 4 more months without letting those feelings consume them both. The rain continued its assault on the roof. The fire crackled and popped, and 2 people stood in a room thick with everything they couldn't have, learning that sometimes the cruelest prisons are the ones we build ourselves, one kind gesture at a time. The scream shattered the winter night like glass breaking against stone. Ira was on her feet before consciousness fully caught up with her body, heart hammering against her ribs. She grabbed the closest thing resembling a weapon, a heavy iron poker from beside the dying fire, and rushed towards Steinar's sleeping alcove. He was tangled in his furs, thrashing like a man drowning. Words poured from his lips in a stream of anguish. Please, no. He's just a boy, please. I'll pay anything. Don't make me. Don't make me. It was the 3rd nightmare this week, but this one was different. Worse. His face was contorted in agony so visceral that Era felt it like a physical blow. Steinar. She set down the poker and approached carefully, as she'd learned to do. Touch him during the nightmares and he'd wake swinging, lost in whatever hell his mind had conjured. Steinar, you're here. You're safe. Come back. His eyes snapped open, wild and unseeing. For one terrible moment, he looked right through her, and she saw something that made her blood run cold. Not just grief, not just guilt, but absolute, soul-deep horror. I killed them, he gasped, his breath coming in ragged bursts. The raid, before Dagmar. There was a raid on the English coast and I killed them. Children. I killed children because the Jarl ordered it and I was too much of a coward to refuse. The world tilted. Ira sank onto the edge of the sleeping platform, suddenly unable to stand. This was new. In 10 months of conversations, confessions, and slowly dissolving boundaries, he'd never mentioned this. How many? The question came out steadier than she felt. 3. His voice cracked on the E. Number. 3 children hiding in a monastery cellar. The oldest couldn't have been more than 10. The Jarl said we couldn't leave witnesses. Said it was strategy, not cruelty. And I obeyed because that's what good warriors do. They obey. He sat up, pressing the heels of his hands against his eyes as if he could push the memories back inside. His whole body shook with silent tremors. That's why I couldn't kill you, he continued, words tumbling out like a confession he'd held back too long. When I saw you in that storage room, I saw those children's faces. Saw another innocent I'd have to murder to protect a secret. And I couldn't. I couldn't add one more ghost to the collection that haunts me every time I close my eyes. Era's throat constricted. She'd spent 10 months viewing Steinar's killing of Dagmar through a particular lens. Self-defense of loved ones. A trolley problem with no good answer. Tragic but understandable. This revelation shattered that carefully constructed narrative. Does Thora know? She managed. No, He lowered his hands, and his eyes were red-rimmed and hollow. I never told her. Never told anyone. What would be the point? It wouldn't bring them back. It wouldn't absolve me. It would just spread the contamination of my guilt to someone else's conscience. But you're telling me, because you deserve to know exactly what kind of man you've been protecting, what kind of monster you've developed feelings for. His laugh was bitter and self-lacerating. You said I was becoming more human to you. But humans don't slaughter children in cold blood, Solvi. Monsters do. The name hung between them, her real name, the one that represented everything she'd been before becoming a thrall, before becoming complicit in murder, before falling for a man who was revealing himself to be far more damaged than she'd ever imagined. How long ago? She asked quietly. The raid. 6 years. I was 26. Young enough to still believe that. Following orders was the same as being honorable. He stood abruptly, pacing the small space like a caged animal. After, I couldn't eat for weeks, couldn't pray. The Skalds sang songs about our victory, about the treasure we'd brought back, and all I could hear was screaming. Children's screams. Ira watched him move, this man who'd become her entire world in the span of 10 months. She should be horrified, should be reconsidering everything she thought she knew about him. Instead, she felt something unexpected, a strange, terrible relief. You're right, she said finally. You are a monster. But so am I. He stopped pacing, turning to look at her with confusion etched across his features. I've been lying to myself, Ira continued, standing to face him, telling myself that I'm innocent in all this, that I'm just a victim of circumstance. But the truth is, I made a choice in that storage room. Not because you threatened me, not really. I chose to protect you because the alternative meant my freedom died with your confession. I chose my liberation over justice for Dagmar, over truth, over everything I was raised to believe was right. That's different. You were coerced. Was I? She moved closer, close enough to see the fine lines of exhaustion around his eyes. Or did I simply see an opportunity and take it? Did I tell myself it was coercion to make the guilt easier to swallow? We're both very good at creating narratives that let us sleep at night, Steinar. Even when the sleep is full of nightmares. He stared at her as if seeing her clearly for the first time. You're trying to make me feel better about being a child killer by equating our crimes. No, I'm trying to make you understand that humans are capable of monstrous things. And that doesn't necessarily make us monsters. It makes us complicated, flawed, capable of both great love and terrible violence. She took a breath, steadying herself. Those children, do you remember their names? The Yi? Question clearly surprised him. I asked. After. I forced myself to learn their names from the survivors. Aelred, Cuthbert, Edgith. Say them. It wasn't a request. Every day for the rest of your life, say their names. Don't let them become abstractions. Don't let their deaths mean nothing. How does that help? His voice broke. How does remembering make any of this better? It doesn't. But forgetting would be worse. Era reached out, and for the first time in 10 months, she deliberately touched him. Her hand found his, their fingers interlacing. You want to know the difference between a monster and a human who's done monstrous things? Monsters don't have nightmares. Monsters don't remember the names. Monsters don't spend 6 years drowning in guilt. His hand tightened around hers, grip almost painful. I don't deserve absolution. I'm not offering it. I'm offering understanding. There's a difference. She held his gaze, refusing to look away from the pain she saw there. You killed those children. That's a fact you'll carry forever. But you also refused to kill me, even when it would have been easier. You've treated me with more humanity than anyone in 14 years. You wake up screaming because your conscience won't let you rest. Those things are also facts. How do you live with contradictions like that? How do you reconcile the good with the terrible? I don't know yet, but I'm learning. Ira squeezed his hand once before releasing it, stepping back to restore some semblance of proper distance. We have 2 months left. 2 months before I walk away and try to build a life from the wreckage of who I used to be. And in those 2 months, I think we should stop pretending we're anything other than what we are, which is two deeply flawed people trying to survive the weight of choices we can never undo. Two people who found something like understanding in the middle of impossible circumstances. Two people who care about each other despite every reason not to. Steiner sank back onto his sleeping platform, looking suddenly exhausted beyond measure. The Jarl is planning another raid. This spring, he wants me to lead it. The words landed like stones in still water, ripples spreading outward. Era felt them in her chest, in her gut, in every part of her that had learned to care about this broken man. What will you do? I don't know. If I refuse, I lose my position, my honor, everything I've built. If I go, I become complicit in whatever atrocities the Jarl demands. And if I lead it, I'm responsible for every life taken, every child orphaned, every family destroyed. He looked up at her, eyes pleading for answers she didn't have. What would you do, Solveig? She wanted to tell him to refuse, to choose conscience over duty, to finally, after all these years, prioritize what was right over what was expected. But she'd learned in 10 months that moral clarity was a luxury neither of them could afford. I would try to find a third option, a way to lead that doesn't require repeating your worst mistakes. And if I couldn't find one, I would make the choice I could live with, knowing that living with any choice at all is its own kind of courage. You make it sound simple. It's not. Nothing about any of this is simple. She moved toward the door, pausing at the threshold. But we're still here, Steiner. Still breathing. Still trying. That has to count for something. The messenger arrived on the first day of the 11th month. His horse lathered with sweat despite the bitter cold. Era was carrying water from the stream when she saw him dismount at the Jarl's hall. Saw the way the men gathered quickly, their faces grave. Something was wrong. Terribly, irreversibly wrong. She found out 3 hours later when Steinar returned to his hall, his face the color of old parchment. He walked past her without speaking, went straight to the chest where he kept his weapons, and began checking each one with mechanical precision. Sword, seax, axe, shield. Steinar. Her voice seemed to come from very far away. What's happened? Thora. The name emerged strangled. She's dying. Childbirth complications. The baby came early and there were problems. So much blood. His hands stilled on the sword hilt. The Jarl sent for me. She's asking for me. For her husband's most trusted warrior to pray with her. The irony was so bitter Era could taste it. Thora calling for the man she truly loved, but having to disguise it as spiritual duty, playing her role until the very end. How long does she have? Hours, maybe. The healer says the bleeding won't stop. He set down the sword, his hands beginning to shake. She's going to die, Solveig. And I have to stand there and watch, and I can't hold her hand the way I want to. Can't tell her I love her. Can't even grieve properly because I'm supposed to be mourning my brother's wife, not the woman who owns my heart. Era moved toward him instinctively, then stopped. What comfort could she offer? She was the woman who developed feelings for a man who belonged entirely to someone else. A woman who was now dying, making those feelings even more inappropriate, more shameful. Go to her, Era said quietly. She needs you. I can't. If I go, I'll break. I'll say something, do something that gives us away. And then everything she sacrificed will be for nothing. Her reputation destroyed in her final hours. Our son's legitimacy questioned as she draws her last breath. Then don't go as her lover. Go as her confessor. The words came from some deep well of understanding Era hadn't known she possessed. Vikings believe in deathbed confessions, don't they? Private words between the dying and a trusted witness. The Jarl won't question it if you ask for time alone with her to receive her final prayers. Steinar's eyes met hers, and in them she saw a desperate, terrible hope. You're asking me to use religious tradition as cover for saying goodbye to the woman I love. I'm saying take what moments you can, because in 1 month I walk away from you forever, and I would give anything, anything at all, for the chance to say a proper goodbye. Don't squander what Thora's offering you. Something shifted in his expression. Gratitude, maybe, or recognition of the sacrifice Era was making, encouraging him to go to another woman while her own heart fractured. He moved toward her then, slowly, as if afraid she might disappear. His hand came up to cup her cheek, thumb brushing away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. You're a better person than I deserve to know. No, I'm just someone who understands what it means to love someone you can never truly have. She leaned into his touch for one brief, stolen moment, then stepped back, breaking contact. Go, before you lose your chance. He went. Era spent the next 6 hours in mechanical motion, cleaning things that were already clean, organizing supplies that needed no organizing, anything to keep her hands busy and her mind from spiraling into the dark territory of what was happening at the Jarl's Hall. When Steinar finally returned, it was full dark. He stood in the doorway, silhouetted against the moonlight, and Ira knew immediately that Thora was gone. His grief was visible in every line of his body, in the way he seemed to have aged a decade in the span of one afternoon. Tell me, she said simply. He came inside, moving like a man underwater. She was lucid at the end. The Jarl gave us privacy to receive her confession. I held her hand and she smiled at me. Actually smiled. His voice cracked. She said, finally I can touch you without hiding. And then she made me promise. Promise what? To take care of our son. To watch over him from a distance. To make sure he grows into a good man, even if he never knows I'm his father. Steinar sank onto the bench, his head in his hands. And then she said something I'll never forget. She said, don't let my death be your final prison. When the year ends, when you free that thrall girl, free yourself too. Let someone love you the way I couldn't. The words hit Era like a physical blow. Thora had known, had seen what was growing between them, and with her dying breath, she'd given them permission. She asked about me, by name, said she'd seen the way you looked at me, the way I looked at you when I thought no one was watching. He raised his head, and his eyes were devastated. She thanked you for protecting our secret, for giving me someone to talk to in the dark hours. She said you'd saved my life as surely as I'd tried to save hers. Ira's legs gave out. She sat heavily on the floor, back against the wall, trying to process. A woman she'd met only once, a woman whose lover she'd fallen for, had spent her last conscious moments thinking about Era's well-being. The baby? She asked. Survived. A girl this time. The Jarl is beside himself with grief and joy. A daughter to remember his wife by. Steinar's laugh was hollow. She has Thora's eyes. Dark like her mother's, not gray like mine. At least there's that mercy. They sat in silence, the weight of loss pressing down like physical force. Outside, the wind howled through the settlement, carrying with it the keening of professional mourners. The Jarl's wife was dead, and the whole community would perform their grief. Only Steinar and Era would know the true depth of the loss. 1 month left, Steinar said finally. 1 month until I give you that key, and you walk away from all of this. Do you want me to stay? The question emerged before Era could stop it. Dangerous, foolish, but necessary. Now that Thora's gone, now that the secret is safer because the other person who knew it is dead, do you want me to stay? He was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely audible. I want you to stay so badly it feels like dying. I want to wake up and see your face and not count down days until you disappear. I want to love you the way Thora said I should, freely and without the weight of murder and complicity between us. He paused, and she heard the tears in his voice even if she couldn't see them in the darkness. But wanting something doesn't make it right. You've earned your freedom. You've paid a price no person should have to pay. And keeping you here, even if you agreed, even if it was your choice, would just be another form of captivity. What if I want the captivity? Era's voice broke. What if freedom sounds lonely and cold and I'd rather stay here with you in our shared prison? Then I'd say you're confusing trauma bonding with love. I'd say 11 months of forced intimacy has created something that feels real, but might dissolve the moment you're truly free to choose. He stood, moving to where she sat, crouching down to her level. I care about you too much to trap you with kind treatment and emotional manipulation, even if I'm desperate for you to stay. His honesty was brutal and beautiful and completely unbearable. So we have 1 month, Era said. 1 month to figure out if what we feel is real or just two broken people clinging to each other in the storm. Yes. And at the end of that month, if you still want to stay, if you're absolutely certain it's not just because you've forgotten what real freedom feels like, then I'll ask you properly. Not as the man who holds your key, but as an equal asking another equal. He reached out, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear with devastating gentleness. But if you have even a shadow of doubt, Solveig, you walk away. You take your freedom and you don't look back. Promise me. I can't promise that. Then promise me you'll try. Promise me you won't sacrifice your liberation out of misplaced loyalty or confused feelings or pity for a man who's done nothing but complicate your life. Era looked at him through tears. She was no longer trying to hide. This man who'd murdered for love, who'd given her back her name, who was now, impossibly, trying to give her true choice, even though it might destroy him. I promise I'll try, she whispered. But Steinar, I think we both know I'm going to fail. The accusation came on the 28th day of the final month, 2 days before Era's freedom. She was at the stream, washing linens in water so cold it made her fingers ache, when she heard the commotion. Voices raised in anger, the sound of men gathering, that particular quality of tension that preceded violence. Her hands stilled in the icy water. Dread pooled in her stomach like poison. Something had gone wrong. She abandoned the washing and ran toward the settlement center, her wet skirt slapping against her legs. A crowd had formed outside the Jarl's hall. At its center stood a man she'd never seen before, travel-worn and lean, with the calculating eyes of someone who dealt in information rather than honest. Work. I have proof, the stranger was saying, his voice carrying across the assembly. Dagmar didn't fall drunk into that ravine. He was murdered, and I know who did it. The world tilted. Era's vision narrowed to a single point, her breath coming in short, inadequate gasps. This couldn't be happening. Not now. Not 2 days before everything ended. She pushed through the crowd, needing to see, needing to understand. That's when she spotted Steinar, standing rigid near the Jarl, his face carefully blank. But she could read the tension in his shoulders, the way his hand rested near his sayax. He knew. Somehow, he'd known this was coming. The stranger continued, warming to his audience. Dagmar came to me before he died. Hired me to deliver a letter if anything happened to him. Took me 11 months to track down where to bring it, but here I am. And the letter names his murderer. Show us, the Jarl commanded, his voice heavy with grief that had never fully lifted since Thora's death. If my cousin was murdered, the killer will face justice. The stranger produced a sealed parchment from his satchel with theatrical flourish. The Jarl broke the seal and read, his face going through a progression of emotions. Confusion, disbelief, fury. This is impossible, he said finally. These are the ravings of a drunk man trying to cause trouble from beyond the grave. What does it say? Someone called from the crowd. The Jarl's hand trembled as he held up the letter. Dagmar. Claims that Steinar killed him to protect a secret. That Thora's son is not mine, but Steinar's. That my wife and my most trusted warrior betrayed me for years. The silence that followed was deafening. Era felt like she was drowning, watching everything they'd protected for a year crumble in the space of heartbeats. Around her, the crowd began to murmur. Shock, speculation, the hungry anticipation of scandal. Steinar's voice cut through the noise, steady and cold. These are lies. Dagmar was bitter and cruel. He wanted to destroy my relationship with my brother before he died, so he invented a story designed to tear our family apart. Then explain how he knew, the stranger interjected, Explain how he described the child's eyes. Gray as winter seas, he wrote. Just like yours, warrior. Just like yours, and not like the Jarl's brown ones. The Jarl turned to look at Steinar, and Eira saw something break in his face. Not anger yet. Something worse. Dawning comprehension. The pieces. Falling into place. My son does have gray eyes, he said slowly. I always thought it strange. Thought perhaps it came from my grandmother's line. But now, he paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was deadly quiet. Look at me, Steinar. Look me in the eye and tell me my wife was faithful. Tell me my son is truly mine. This was the moment. The crossroads where everything would be decided. Steinar could lie, could maintain the story, could fight to protect Thora's reputation even in death. Or he could tell the truth and face execution. Eira watched his face, saw the calculation happening behind his eyes, saw the exact moment he made his choice. Your wife loved you, Steinar said, and Eira's heart stopped. She tried to be the wife you deserved. But yes, the boy is mine. Conceived during the harvest feast 3 years ago when you were away on trading business. It happened once. One moment of weakness that we both regretted for the rest of our lives. The Jarl's face went white, then red, then white again. You dare stand before me and confess to this betrayal? You asked for truth. I'm giving it to you. Steinar's voice never wavered. Dagmar discovered the secret and threatened to expose it unless we paid him. When payment wasn't enough, when he decided revelation would be more entertaining than silver, I made a choice. I killed him to protect your son from being cast out, to protect Thora from being executed for adultery, to protect you from the knowledge that would destroy you. Protect me? The Jarl's laugh was terrible to hear. You murdered my cousin and cuckolded me, and you claim you were protecting me. I was protecting your child, a boy who did nothing wrong except be born from a moment of weakness. He calls you father. He loves you. None of this is his fault. The Jarl drew his sword in one smooth motion. The crowd gasped, pulling back to give space. Eira's whole body went cold with terror. You should have told me, the Jarl said, his sword point inches from Steinar's throat. If you had any honor left, you would have confessed immediately. We could have handled this quietly, sent the child away, dissolved the marriage. But instead, you compounded betrayal with murder, made me raise another man's son as my own, made me love a lie. Would you have handled it quietly? Steinar didn't flinch from the blade. Or would you have done what the law demands? Executed Thora, cast out the child, killed me in combat. Your cousin knew exactly what revealing this would do. It would have destroyed 4 lives, so I chose to destroy 1 instead. That wasn't your choice to make. No, it wasn't. But I made it anyway, and I'd make it again. Steinar's eyes blazed with defiant conviction. Because that boy deserves a life. He deserves to grow up with a father who loves him, even if that father isn't the man who sired him. You're his father in every way that matters, brother. Don't let Dagmar's poison destroy that. The Jarl's sword arm trembled. For one long, agonizing moment, Eira thought he might thrust forward, end it all right there in front of the assembled settlement. Instead, he lowered the blade. The thing will decide your fate, not me. Not today when I'm too angry to think clearly. He turned to his men. Take him. Lock him in the storage shed until the assembly can be called. As 2 warriors moved to seize Steinar, his eyes found Eira's in the crowd. In that brief glance, she saw everything he couldn't say. Apology, resignation, and strangest of all, relief. As if being caught, being forced to confess, had lifted some unbearable weight. Then he was being led away, and the stranger who'd delivered the letter was being questioned, and the settlement was erupting into chaos as people tried to process what they'd just witnessed. Eira stood frozen, her mind racing. 2 days. She'd been 2 days from freedom, 2 days from walking away and starting over. Now everything was crumbling, and she held the only information that might save Steinar's life or condemn him further. She was the witness to the murder, the only person besides Steinar who knew exactly what had happened in that storage room, the only one who could testify to his state of mind, his motivations, his choice between impossible options. The thing would convene in 3 days. 3 days to decide whether to come forward, whether to risk everything she'd suffered for by telling the truth, whether saving the man she loved was worth sacrificing the freedom she'd endured almost a year of complicity to earn. An elderly woman touched Era's arm, making her jump. "You're his thrall, aren't you? The one who serves in his private hall?" Era nodded mutely. "Then you'll be called to testify. Thralls who serve in a household always testify at their master's trial." The woman's eyes were sharp and knowing. "Best prepare yourself, girl. What you say in 3 days might determine whether that man lives or dies. That's a heavy burden for one so young to carry." The woman moved away, leaving Era standing alone in the dispersing crowd. Heavy burden. Such inadequate words for the impossible choice she now faced. Testify and tell the truth, revealing her own complicity, but potentially saving Steinar by explaining his motivations. Stay silent and let the assembly judge him based on partial information. Or lie, claim ignorance, and watch him die to protect her own freedom. 3 days to decide. 3 days to determine not just Steinar's fate, but her own soul's. The key to her collar suddenly felt impossibly heavy in her mind. Freedom was supposed to arrive in 2 days. Instead, she'd be standing before the thing, deciding whether truth or self-preservation mattered more. The thing assembled on a morning so cold the breath of every person gathered formed clouds that hung in the air like ghosts. Era stood at the edge of the assembly circle, her thrall's collar feeling tighter than it had in months. Around her, freemen and women arranged themselves according to status and clan affiliation. She remained apart, belonging nowhere, waiting to be called. Steinar stood in the center, hands bound, his face composed but pale. He hadn't looked at her once since being led from the storage shed. Whether that was strategy or mercy, she couldn't tell. The Jarl opened the proceedings, his voice flat and emotionless. He recited the charges methodically. Murder of his cousin Dagmar, adultery with his wife, conspiracy to deceive. Each word fell like a stone into still water. "The accused has confessed to these crimes," the Jarl continued, "but confession alone does not constitute the full story. We will hear from witnesses before rendering judgment." The stranger who delivered the letter spoke first, describing how Dagmar had paid him to hold the sealed document and deliver it if anything suspicious happened. His testimony was brief and damning. It established premeditation on Dagmar's part, but also confirmed that Steinar had motive and opportunity. Then came the healer who'd examined Dagmar's body when it was found. She described injuries consistent with a fall, but also noted bruising that suggested a struggle. The crowd murmured. Evidence was mounting, even though everyone already knew the truth from Steinar's confession. Finally, the law speaker called Ira's name. The walk to the center of the assembly circle felt like crossing an ocean. Every eye tracked her movement. Every breath seemed to pause, waiting. She stopped before the law speaker, a wizened man with eyes that had witnessed 50 years of judgments. "You are Era, thrall in service to Steinar the accused?" "I am." Her voice came out stronger than she felt. "And you reside in his private hall, do you not? You would have knowledge of his comings and goings, his state of mind, his actions in the days surrounding Dagmar's death." This was it, the moment everything had been building toward. Era's eyes finally found Steinar's. He was looking at her now, and in his gaze she saw something that made her chest ache. Not pleading, not expectation, just quiet acceptance. He'd made his choices, and now he was prepared to face their consequences. He'd given up trying to control the outcome. "I have knowledge," Era said slowly, "that I believe this assembly should hear." The law speaker gestured for her to continue. The settlement held its collective breath. 11 months ago, I witnessed Steinar kill Dagmar in the storage room of the Longhouse kitchen. I saw it happen. I watched him drive his sayax between his cousin's ribs, watched him drag the body toward the animal pens. And when he discovered I'd seen everything, He made me an offer. Gasps rippled through the crowd. The Jarl's face went rigid with shock. Even Steinar looked surprised, though whether at her honesty or her decision to come forward she couldn't tell. "What offer?" the law speaker demanded. "1 year of service in exchange for my freedom." Keep his secret, and at the end of 12 months, he would buy my freedom and release me. Ira's voice gained strength as she continued. I was terrified. I believed he would kill me if I refused, so I said yes, and for 11 months I've lived with that choice. Complicit in covering up a murder in exchange for the one thing I've wanted since I was 12 years old. The crowd erupted, voices shouting questions, accusations, demands for clarity. The law speaker raised his hand for silence, and gradually the assembly quieted. "You admit to conspiracy in hiding this crime?" "I do." Ira met the law speaker's eyes directly. "I am guilty of protecting a murderer, of choosing my own freedom over justice, and I'm prepared to face whatever punishment this assembly deems appropriate. But before you judge either of us, you need to understand why the murder happened." "We know why," someone shouted from the crowd. "To hide his adultery and bastard child." "No." Ira's voice cut through the yo, murmuring. "That's what happened. But it's not why." She turned to address the full assembly, years of silence finding voice. Dagmar wasn't blackmailing them for silver. He was doing it for entertainment. He told Thora that revealing the secret at a wedding feast would be more fun than any amount of payment. He wanted to watch a family destroy itself, watch a child be cast out, watch a woman executed. He wanted the spectacle. She paused, letting that sink in. "Steinar told me something the night he confessed. He said he was choosing one guilty life over 3 innocent ones. A child who did nothing wrong, a woman trapped in an arranged marriage who made one mistake, a brother who loved his son regardless of blood. Was the choice legal? No. Was it right? I don't know. But was it understandable? Yes. Completely, humanly understandable." The Jarl's voice broke through, raw with emotion. "You're defending the man who betrayed me?" Ira turned to face him directly. "No, my lord. I'm asking you to see the full picture before making a decision that can never be undone. Your son, the boy you've raised for 3 years, calls you father. He loves you. In his eyes, his world, his heart, you are his father. Steinar gave him that gift by removing the threat of revelation. Is that worth nothing?" "It's worth everything," the Jarl said quietly. "But it doesn't erase the betrayal." "No, it doesn't. Nothing can erase it, but execution won't either. It will just add more death to a situation already soaked in tragedy." Ira's throat tightened with tears she refused to shed. "I've spent 11 months watching Steinar live with what he did. He has nightmares. He remembers the names of children he killed years ago on a raid. He carries so much guilt, it's destroying him from the inside. Death might be a mercy compared to the life he's living." Steinar's voice, quiet but clear, finally spoke. "Ira, Solveig, stop." She turned to him, and the look in his eyes was both grateful and agonized. "You've done enough," he continued. "More than enough. Don't sacrifice yourself trying to save me. Take your freedom and go. That was always the deal." "The deal," Ira said, her voice breaking, "was based on fear and coercion and impossible choices. Just like your deal with Dagmar. Just like your choice in that storage room. We're all making decisions under pressure that no person should have to face. But I'm choosing now, freely and clearly, to tell the truth. All of it. Even if it costs me everything." The law speaker raised his hand again. "The assembly has heard enough testimony. We will deliberate and render judgment." What followed was 2 hours of intense debate. Ira was led to the side, neither fully part of the assembly nor dismissed from it. She watched faces argue, saw alliances form and fracture. The case was unprecedented. Murder in defense of innocence, confession given freely, a thrall testifying against her own interests. Finally, the law speaker called for order and pronounced judgment. "Steinar, you are guilty of murder and adultery. These are facts confirmed by your own confession and witness testimony. However, this assembly recognizes extraordinary circumstances. Dagmar's character, his intentions, the protection of an innocent child. He paused, his face grave. You will not be executed. Instead, you are declared outlaw for a period of 3 years. You must leave this settlement and not return until that time has passed. All property is forfeit to the Jarl. You leave with only what you can carry. Relief and despair warred in Ira's chest. Not death, but exile. 3 years wandering as an outlaw, vulnerable to anyone who wished to claim the bounty that came with such a sentence. As for the thrall Eira, the law speaker continued, and Eira's breath caught. You have confessed to conspiracy. You aided in covering up a crime. However, you did so under duress and have now testified truthfully despite personal cost. This assembly grants you your freedom immediately with no debt owed. Your collar is removed. You may go where you wish. The world spun. Freedom. They were giving her freedom, not in 2 days as Steinar had promised, but now, earned through truth rather than silence. The Jarl stepped forward, and Eira saw tears tracking down his face. Steinar, you were my brother in all but blood. You betrayed me in the worst way possible, but you also tried in your broken way to protect my son, our son. He paused, struggling with the words. I will raise him, love him, tell him his mother was good and his father was complicated. And maybe, in 3 years, if you survive, we can find a way towards something that isn't quite forgiveness, but isn't quite hatred either. Steinar bowed his head. That's more than I deserve, brother. 2 hours later, Ira stood at the edge of the settlement, watching Steinar prepare for exile. He had a pack with supplies, warm furs, his weapons. The Jarl had been generous, despite everything. You're free, Steinar said without looking at her. Why are you still here? Because I need to ask you something. Eira moved closer, close enough to see the exhaustion etched in every line of his face. Where will you go? North. Maybe Iceland. Somewhere I can disappear for 3 years and try to figure out how to be a person again. Take me with you. He turned then, eyes wide with shock. What? I said take me with you. I'm free now, free to make my own choices. And I choose to go north with an outlaw who's probably going to get himself killed within the first month because he's too noble to steal and too guilty to ask for help. Solvig, you're free. Actually, truly free. Why would you trade that for the life of an outlaw's companion? Because freedom means having choices, and I'm choosing you. Not because I have to, not because of coercion or bargains or guilt, but because in 11 months, you gave me back my name, my voice, my humanity, and I want to see what we can build together when we're both free, both choosing each other without secrets or crimes between us. Steinar's face crumpled. He reached for her, pulling her into an embrace that felt like coming home. I don't deserve you. No, you don't. But I'm coming anyway. We'll figure out the rest as we go. They left as the sun set, 2 figures walking into the wilderness, an outlaw warrior and a freed thrall, both carrying the weight of the past but reaching toward something new. Something earned through impossible choices and brutal honesty. Behind them, the settlement gradually returned to normal. The Jarl raised his son with love complicated by knowledge. The assembly told and retold the story until it became legend. And somewhere in the north, 2 people who'd found each other in darkness learned to live in light. Sometimes the hardest choices aren't between right and wrong, but between 2 impossible rights. Eira stood at that crossroads, watching a man commit murder to protect innocence, and had to decide in seconds what kind of person she would become. Would you have made the same choice? Would you trade your silence for freedom, knowing that silence makes you complicit? And when the truth finally demanded to be spoken, when everything you'd endured for a year hung in the balance, would you have the courage to sacrifice your dreams to save someone else's life? This story reminds us that good people can make terrible choices, and terrible choices don't always make people irredeemable. Steinar killed, but he also remembered the names of every victim. He betrayed, but he also tried to protect the innocent. He was a monster and a man, just like all of us, carry the capacity for both darkness and light. The question isn't whether we're capable of wrong, it's what we do after, how we carry the weight, whether we let guilt destroy us or transform us into something more honest, more human. We all live with secrets. We all make compromises. We all choose, every single day, between what's easy and what's right. Era's story challenges us to ask ourselves, when the moment comes, when the choice is impossible and the stakes are unbearable, who will we choose to be? If this story moved you, if it made you question what you would do in her place, please like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and follow for more stories that dig deep into the complexity of being human. Because sometimes, the most powerful stories are the ones that refuse to give us easy answers.